Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-minute histories videos. And today, I can't even believe I'm saying this, but today we have reached a milestone. This is video number 100. We started back in March, on the same day that Governor Hogan issued the first stay-at-home order, and somehow between then and now we have gotten to video number 100. And I want to say thank you, and I know I've said it before, but I want to say thank you to my film crew, my daughter Leah and my son Johns, although school, even virtual school, has put a crimp on some of that, especially to my colleague Molly, who has learned how to become Ken Burns over the last 7 or 8 months, and most of all to all of you for sending in your comments and your suggestions and your criticisms, for sharing the videos to your sister in Albuquerque and your brother who grew up in Baltimore but now lives in Boston, and most of all to hanging in there with us on these videos and learning with us as we scratch deeper into the city that we love, Baltimore. All right, today we thought for this milestone, what we would do is say thank you and honor our Douglas H. Gordon Award winner this year, David Gleason. And I'm going to ask David to say a few words here in a second, but I thought I would start out really quickly by telling who Douglas Gordon is and why we have an award for him, and then sharing a few milestones of historic preservation over the last 40 or more years that David has been a civic leader in it. All right, Douglas Gordon. In the 1950s, an institution that we all love, the Walters Art Museum, decided that it would be a good idea to tear down the Garrett Jacobs Mansion, which we know is the Engineers Club, and the buildings to its west, all the way to Cathedral Street, and erect a new art museum gallery. And one person in particular thought that was a terrible idea, and that was Douglas Gordon. He was a prominent lawyer, former president of St. John's in Annapolis, and a staunch preservationist. As my friend Jack Lapidus said, who was also part of this effort back in the 1950s and 60s, every civic institution in the city, every elected official lined up behind the Walters to do this demolition. The buildings on that part of the street had become about 70 years old, and there's a phenomenon in historic preservation called the J curve. And that is when a building is built, brand new, everybody, or if it's well built and well designed, people appreciate it, but over time it gets older and it gets sort of worn around the edges, and then styles change and people's perspectives change. And by the time it gets to be about 70, it's on the bottom of that J. And a lot of buildings don't ever make it up. They keep going down until they're demolished or fall down. But a few, just a few, if they can hang in there a few more years, they turn the corner and they start coming back up on the other part of the J. The Garrett Jacobs Mansion was down at the bottom part in the 1950s. And most people thought that it was going to be gone. But Douglas Gordon stepped up with a campaign. He did tours of the building, and he really promoted it. He built a coalition around saving it. And for the first and only time in Baltimore's history, the voters turned down the Walters Art Museum. The Walters had sought $1 million in a bond bill, through a bond bill, to do the demolition. And Baltimore city residents said, no, we don't think demolition is a good idea. So to honor his commitment and his effort, we have an award, the Douglas H. Gordon Award. We don't award it every year, but we do award it when somebody has spent years and years in leadership positions fighting for historic places in the city. David Gleason certainly fits that. Before turning it over, let me share 2 things about efforts that David's been involved with. One is his first sort of preservation foray in Fells Point. In the 1980s, early 1980s, so about 40 years ago, Fells Point had come through a battle to keep a highway from being built here. People like Bob Eney and Tom Ward and Jack Lapidus and Barbara Mikulski fought to keep the highway out. But then the next effort was that the buildings, the historic buildings that had been here, had languished for about 15 years. Who would want to put money into a building, put a new roof on, or do tuck pointing when the proverbial sword of Damocles was hanging over their heads? The buildings, after all, were going to be demolished to make way for a highway. Why spend money on a roof? So even though there was no highway, there were dozens and dozens of buildings that needed serious help. And behind me is one of those, the Captain Winning's house. David came in the early 1980s as a preservation architect and helped stabilize and restore this building, which today is just magnificent. It's one of the few surviving captain's houses, ship's captain, sort of top of the pecking order around 1800, 1790s, 1800, built wonderful houses, this one included. David then moved on to become a board member and eventually board president of the Preservation Society and helped save the Robert Long House. It's the oldest urban residence in the city. I think we did a video on that if you want to learn more. But David stepped in as a Preservation Society board member and board president, built a coalition, raised funds, and not only saved the house from falling down, restored it and turned it into a house museum. And that's what it is today. Really fantastic. David then sort of moved westward, if you will. He joined the board of Baltimore Heritage. And in the 1990s, Baltimore City in 1998 culminated in an effort where the Baltimore City Council voted to adopt a master plan and an ordinance for revitalization of what was then called the west side of downtown. Now we know it as Market Center, the area around Lexington Market. And that was a good thing, but what was not a good thing is that plan called for the demolition of upwards of 150 historic buildings, some very significant historic buildings. Some of the last remaining cast iron buildings in the city were on the chopping block, as was Reed's Drugstore, the site of probably the first student lunch counter sit-in in the civil rights era, as was the Congress Hotel, all potentially up for demolition. David, along with other Baltimore Heritage leaders like Bill Pensick and John McClay and Fred Shokin, as well as a coalition with Preservation Maryland and Tyler Gerhardt, developed an alternative plan that would similarly revitalize the area around Lexington Market, but do so as a preservation-based strategy and not a demolition-based strategy. That effort is still underway. The city was finally forced to switch from demolition to preservation, and we're still seeing that unfold literally today as we see some revitalization projects going in. All right, with that, David has gone on to do many other great things. He is continuing to lead efforts in Lafayette Square in West Baltimore and trying to preserve some of our rich heritage there as well. But I'm going to stop and ask David to come up and say a few words, and I'm going to proverbially, we're still in our time of COVID, so I'm not going to do this right next to David, but I'm going to proverbially hand him our award certificate, which is a small piece of paper, but comes with an enormous thank you and an enormous debt of thanks for all of the work that he's done. All right, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
John, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I would like to take a moment also to thank all the board members of Baltimore Heritage for conferring on me this great honor of being this year's recipient of the Douglas H. Gordon Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm honored and humbled by their recognition of my efforts to facilitate and to promote historic preservation initiatives in Baltimore during the course of my architectural profession here in town. As we stand here in Fells Point on Bond Street in front of the 1782 Captain Winning House, the ultimate outcome and fate of Federal Hill and Fells Point was still in question in the early 1970s. Although the road fight had been successfully concluded, the actual outcome for these houses was yet to be decided. In 1984, I had the good fortune to have a client who believed in the history and reconstruction of Fells Point and gave me the opportunity to restore and rehabilitate the Captain Winning House. And today, his faith in rehabilitation and preservation paid off. For both Federal Hill and Fells Point are both very desirable neighborhoods in Baltimore. Having had the experience here in Fells Point with the Captain Winning House, I have completed many other restoration and preservation projects throughout Baltimore, in Fells Point, in Federal Hill, in Bolton Hill, and in many historic districts throughout the city of Baltimore. I met along the way so many wonderful people who have a faith and commitment to historic preservation. And through knowing them, I have come to believe that you can, through organization and persistent action, actually affect public opinion and public outcome. And preservation can be a very useful tool in rebuilding and revitalizing cities. Preservation and history have always played an important part in my life, and I have always looked to the restoration and rehabilitation of neighborhoods as something that's very important for cities to move forward and to rebuild themselves. So I would like to thank Baltimore Heritage Board again for the recognition of my work, and to thank them for being a preservation organization that provides the opportunities to move forward and to revitalize historic neighborhoods.
Congratulations again, David, on a well-deserved award, and maybe more importantly, thank you for your years and years of work in historic places and neighborhoods in Baltimore. As we wrap up this 100th video, we'd like to take this opportunity to again congratulate all of this year's Preservation Award winners. We're going to scroll through them one more time. And as we're scrolling, maybe note the diversity of work that's reflected here. They include rehabbing small row houses to enormous industrial buildings. They include important cultural institutions like the H.L. Mencken House and the Pratt Library. They include painstaking restoration like at Clifton Mansion. They include projects in East Baltimore and West Baltimore, North Baltimore and South Baltimore. And most of all, they are the work of people who care. It's important as we emphasize the work that we also emphasize the people behind it. Restoration doesn't just magically happen. It happens from the hard work of individuals. Neighborhood revitalization doesn't just happen. It also is the result of hours and days and sometimes years of work by individuals. And books and advocacy work obviously don't just happen. They too come about only from the dedication of great people. And so to the people who take derelict row houses and turn them into wonderful homes for new owners, and to the architects and construction workers and craftsmen who report each day to the construction site of old industrial buildings, turning them slowly from liabilities into assets, and to the researchers and photographers and authors whose work is critical in helping all of us appreciate Baltimore, a sincere thank you from all of us at Baltimore Heritage. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.